Salutations, one and all, and welcome to RWBY Revisited. In this entry, let's take a look at the setting of Remnant itself. More specifically, the Kingdoms. Please be aware that spoilers for all seasons will follow, and any material revealed or expounded upon in outside sources will not be weighted as heavily as that seen in the show. The four Kingdoms of Remnant: Vale, Atlas, Mistral, and Vacuo. These cities and their territories act as bastions for humanity and the Faunus against the grim, natural disasters, and the bandits that can be found outside their borders. But how exactly do these nations operate? Now, obviously, fictional works don't need to delve into the minutiae of how governments work, as most of that wouldn't be pertinent and would likely slow down the story. But just for the fun of it, let's examine what we've got to work with. Also, for the purposes of this video, I will be referring to each region by the kingdom that governs it. Yes, the continents have names as well, but since they are mentioned so infrequently, referring to them by the kingdom simplifies matters. For starters, each of these nations is referred to as a kingdom despite the lack of a monarch. This is a holdover from when they were ruled by royalty, and the name was simply never changed. Now, the kingdoms are governed by a council of elected officials. What's interesting, though, is that these councils seem to be comprised of very few individuals. In the sequence where Ozpin is chastised, only 3 silhouettes can be seen, and when Jacques Schnee invited the council to his manor, 4 members, including himself, were in attendance. This leads one to believe that either only a small portion of the councils have ever been depicted in one place at any given time, or that these councils are incredibly small. If we use the one seen in Atlas as our reference, there are only 5 members in total. Ironwood held 2 seats on the council, Jacques held 1 at the time, along with Sleet and Camilla. That is a shockingly small number of people to run a nation.
There are too few of us now. Too few of us ain't left to manage them.
Yes, the nations of Remnant were not as expansive as our nations, but even so, they still have to contend with the same issues. Agriculture, infrastructure, military, foreign affairs, matters of law, and more all need to be handled by a government, no matter if the nation is enormous or minuscule. Likely these council members would have had aides to assist them, but those members of staff do not carry executive power, and judging by Ironwood never having been depicted with much support staff, these others might not have much either.
I'm escaping to the one place that hasn't been corrupted by capitalism. Space!
For that matter, we also don't know how the council is structured, at least not completely. We do know that the headmaster or headmistress of the nation's academy holds a seat by default, as does the leader of that nation's military. That's why Ironwood held 2 seats. Does this mean that the headmaster of the academy also needs to be elected by the people, seeing as they have a strong pull in government affairs? Logic would dictate that they would be, but then that raises the question of who is then eligible for the role. The headmaster needs to be both capable of teaching their students as well as handling politics. However, if there are only 5 or so members, then this means that in Atlas, someone in Ironwood's position holds 2/5 of the votes in any matter that the council is addressing. All he or someone in his position would need to hold a majority vote would be 1 additional member on their side. Checks and balances are mentioned by him, but we don't know what those are or how effective they may be. In a governing body of fewer than 10 members, 2 votes being held by 1 individual is quite the amount of political power.
I love democracy.
This also sets the precedent that other council members preside over other specific matters of governance. As to what those may be, we can't say for certain. Robin running for a seat on the council was a large event in Season 7, but we don't know what she would have been in charge of. With the wall surrounding Mantle being in disrepair, it is a possibility that she may have been running for a position involving this sort of matter, but leaving a gaping hole in the city's defense was a massive stroke of ineptitude from the government as a whole. Also, the election came down to her and Jacques holding all of the votes. Whether this was due to Watts' meddling or not isn't confirmed, but any of the other candidates failed to achieve a single percentage of the votes, even collectively. On another note, we also know that a war was once waged between the kingdoms, with Atlas and Mistral on one side, opposed by Vale and Vacuo. While information on this conflict is sparse, it is mentioned that the settlements belonging to the kingdoms were lost, due to having few people left to defend them. This does indicate that the kingdoms either enforced a draft, or that the populace was so engrossed by the war that they left their homes undefended voluntarily. We also know that Vacuo was once the largest source of dust mining, but its resources have since been all but depleted. Vacuo and Vale were also unique in that they were the only two kingdoms connected by land. Whether their borders are strictly defined or left unoccupied was never fully addressed though. Atlas and Mistral easily have their borders defined by bodies of water, making their range of influence clearer. Menagerie, while not a kingdom in and of itself, is also an independent state, as it isn't governed by any of the other four nations. It is seemingly exclusively inhabited by Faunus, though whether this is because they enforce this or that humans simply chose not to live there is undefined. We're not informed of how Menagerie governs itself, but it seems to, for the most part, get along well enough for itself. The White Fang holds a large amount of sway here, though it is somewhat split between the violent faction and the isolationist one. The name is also an inspired choice. Menagerie is defined as a collection of wild or unusual animals, especially for exhibition, or an unusual and varied group of people. Whether the Faunus chose this name for themselves, or if it was given that name by humanity, is similarly unknown. If it was the former, then it might have been a joke on the part of the founders, showing the world that they were fully aware of how they were seen by humanity and mocked their views of them. If it was the latter case, though, then that becomes a bit more macabre. An interesting point to note is that the settled portion we see of Menagerie is a tropical paradise. Other sources cite Grimm inhabiting the island's eastern desert, but we never see that in the show. In fact, on the island itself, we never see any Grimm on Menagerie at all. While the citizens of Atlas and Mantle hold their kingdom in such high regard, they are entirely dependent on technology to sustain themselves. If the heating goes out, Mantle will freeze. If the gravity dust runs out, then Atlas would fall. Never mind the Staff of Creation being tampered with. Menagerie, by contrast, looks to be an almost ideal vacation spot, at least in terms of the land itself. Given that, it's odd that none of the other kingdoms elected to establish settlements there and claim it for themselves.
But that's simply not possible.
Why isn't it possible?
It's just not.
Why not?
But on top of all of this is how dangerous it is outside the major cities. Settlements exist, but they are established to be sitting precariously, having to deal with both bandits and Grimm. Given how we see many of them destroyed, it's a strange choice for anyone to decide to live out here. There also doesn't seem to be any safe transportation between the kingdoms. A large portion of Season 4 was detailing the journey of RWBY and the rest of Team Juniper as they traveled on foot to Mistral. The means they used to cross the strait between the two kingdoms is also unknown. Airships are also shown to be attacked regularly, and transportation by sea is similarly hazardous. We have seen trains used as well, but they can similarly be attacked, not to mention that resourceful bandits could possibly sabotage the tracks. You would think that huntsmen and huntresses would be employed in droves to ensure that people can get from one kingdom to another safely, yet we saw no such occurrences in the show. This leads to each of them seeming incredibly isolated. Remnant is shown to have extremely advanced technology in many aspects, so it would stand to reason that each of the kingdoms would attempt to expand their reach, which would involve establishing more cities and securing safe transportation routes and trade routes with each other. Yet it seems little has been done in that regard. There is also the large northwestern landmass that it would seem as though no nation has attempted to settle. But addressing the elephant in the room, 2 of the kingdoms have been destroyed. Atlas having been so in Season 8, and apparently Vale was as well, off-screen and with little to no detail.
Everyone in
Vale
is dead.
This left only Vacuo and possibly Mistral as of the show's current fate. Such losses put the surviving population of Remnant on thin ice, with half of their major settlements gone. But these were just my observations. What are yours? What do you think about how the kingdoms were run? Leave your thoughts in the comments below, leave a like on this video if you're so inclined, and subscribe to see more. And may you all have a weapon in each hand.